Okay, it seems to be working now. As you can tell by the title of the video and possibly by my appearance, this is not my normal get ready with me stream that I plan to do today. For one, I woke up very early. It was like seven something because I had to take my partner to her new job, and that was planned. It wasn't anything unexpected. But my intention was to come back and do the get ready with me after having dropped her off. But now I've got a whole nother topic, and I'm dressed in gym shorts and a random t-shirt, so I'm not really dressed for makeup, and the get ready with me was really just makeup. So Um, I won't be doing makeup today, but not because I'm giving up on the whole project to try and motivate myself and feel better. Just it doesn't really go with the outfit, and I have something else on my mind. So the title of this stream is Pathological Pedantry and the Assumption of Meaning, which I like for so many reasons and on so many levels because it is kind of self-referential in a very subtle way. At least I think it's subtle. Um, so I was talking to a friend of mine, and we're going to be discussing neurotype and communication styles for this stream. For those of you who don't know, which is probably all of you because I've never mentioned it on stream before, I have a problem with being pathologically pedantic as well as adopting an affected speech pattern in times of stress. What that means is I get extremely focused on the definition and proper usage of words, and I get caught up on those details. That's pathologically pedantic. Pathologically, because it comes from an underlying neurological condition, and pedantic meaning um, actually meaning pendant shaped, or but in usage, just caught up on small details. And when it comes to affected speech, you may have noticed it already in the video. My tendency to speak with larger words or to adopt a dialect or mannerism of speaking such that I would come off as either more educated is what I've been told it comes off as, which I don't like. I don't think it's more educated, and I think that's one of the main problems people face when they have my specific affected speech pattern is that they're misconstrued as condescending or that they think they're better than you or they're talking down to you, and that's not the intention, at least in my case, at all. Um, so it's in combination with the pathological pedantry. I will, especially in times of stress, adopt this. I will go as far as to call it pseudo intellectual mannerisms of speaking. I think I'm using mannerisms wrong there, ironically. I say pseudo intellectual even though I don't agree with the usage there because I think it possibly will convey my meaning better than actually adhering to the pedantry and finding a phrase that way. Um, this, in my case, stems from absolute anxiety and stress at being misunderstood and therein at being punished, for lack of a better word, because it is a coping mechanism to avoid punishment. And it happens whenever you learn that being misunderstood or misconstrued, more often than outright misunderstood, will result in some form of negative stimuli, usually other people's horrible reactions, or in many cases, when you're growing up and you're a child and therefore subject to the whims of a higher authority, uh, it will be proper punishments, or even without something being misconstrued to the point of actually getting into trouble with your teacher, your parent, whoever it may be, you still run the risk of what I like to think of as internal punishment. It comes from yourself, and that's something you can clearly work on in therapy, but it's like shame. And it's most commonly shame. And it is exacerbated by itself because the more it happens, the more it reinforces that negative stimuli will come if there is such a misunderstanding. And so you take steps to avoid it. And at the very least, you have the defense mechanism of being able to say, that is not what I said. That is not what those words mean. Let me explain. And that might, at least in your mind, be taken better by those who might misconstrue you than saying, no, you don't understand, or no, you are mistaken, because that puts a kind of accusation on them and might make them feel bad or give them some form of negative stimulus and get into their issues. And you don't want to overcomplicate the matter, which is ironically why you're complicating it from the start to an extent. I I very much enjoy this topic and enjoy being able to lean into my pathological pedantry because the fact that it's a coping mechanism to avoid stress also creates this kind of feedback where even without the stressful environment or stimuli that would prompt the response in the first place, it is almost soothing to indulge in because it feels safe. Because if your brain didn't associate it with safety, it wouldn't be so fixated on this and it wouldn't perform the coping mechanism. So, to add some context, myself and a friend of mine got into a major disagreement. I am going to try and present things as minorly biased as possible. I say that because you can never truly be unbiased. And I know that, especially in this scenario, I could never accomplish that. But it comes down to the friend was asking me a question about my lived experience. And so I tried to explain it to them. And because it was a rather complicated topic to begin with, and because it was a topic that other people have misconstrued and gotten angry about in the past, my affected speech patterns and pathological pedantry were already prevalent in my explanation. That is important later in the story. But I'm explaining my lived experiences to them, and they say something along the lines of, I do not believe that is possible. And so what I hear, just boiling it down to the emotional through line, is I do not believe you because I'm talking about something I've experienced. I'm talking about my own condition, my own disability. I'm talking about a fact of my life, and they're saying that doesn't happen. I don't believe it happens. I don't believe you. And that very much hurt me. Um, it harkens back to several situations in my life where I've tried to share something, usually a traumatic experience, and the person's response boils down to, I don't believe you. I don't believe that is possible. And this is the reason why you are wrong. This is the reason why that didn't happen to you. This is the reason why, etc. I hope you understand by that point. So, I am horribly upset. This is very late at night. And so I tell them, I can't talk about this right now. I'm done. Good night. I'll talk to you in the morning. This is horrible. I feel so horrible. And I have dissociative identity disorder, and I was diagnosed a decade ago. Um, so, a minor caveat to the story is another altar fronted by morning to confront them about the situation. And so we came in more aggressively than we otherwise would have. But in that message, we gave examples of conversations that we've had in our life about similar topics, similar situations in regards to coping mechanisms and trauma, which is what the entire conversation had been rooted in from the start, given that they were asking me about my experience with my diagnosed coping mechanism. Um, and they took great offense to the examples given, which I'm trying to avoid giving on stream because of I don't know Twitch's or YouTube's, what word am I looking for? Protocols? Priorities? No. Procedures? Something along those. I don't know their guidelines well enough to know if I would be okay sharing these stories because they were quite traumatic. They both examples given were of a sexual trauma nature, unfortunately. If I had other examples that stood out as potently in my mind and felt as um, not sapient, as easily applicable and understandable to the situation. I'll have to rewatch some Hank Green videos to try and find that word. He uses it a lot. Um, then I would have used those examples. But the fact is I didn't, and because the friend, to my understanding, does not agree with the sentiments communicated in the examples I gave, and in fact, as far as I can tell, finds the examples given to be ignorant in nature, they were personally offended as they were being compared to those ignorant people who have stances that probably offend them. And they were being compared not because they have the same stance, but because the way they were presenting their actions were the same. It's procedure versus context. Anyway, this has become a very long, drawn out discussion back and forth between myself and the friend. And we were talking about the message that compared the procedure of point making that was, I don't believe that is possible in response to my sharing my personal experience to um, just get to the bottom of the harm caused by it because we both agreed and it was coming to light we both agreed there was harm caused by it, But for some reason, it came up in the discussion that, well, was the harm intentional? My friend stated that the harm was, it was different when he said something that very much hurt me and when I said something that very much hurt him. Because in my case, when I said something, the harm was specifically intentional and objectively harmful. And of course, if I agreed with that, yeah, that would be, you know, point taken. Um, so the discussion devolved because I had to make sure to point out that I disagree with the assessment that the message was intentionally, objectively, or deliberately harmful at all. And what came next was them saying, I don't have an exact quote. I would like to exact quote them, but I also like to, um, go back. I don't want to keep receipts. I just want to be accurate. And um, he says something along the lines of, you must be on crack. I remember him saying that a few times because holy shit, how could you not believe there's something wrong with what was said? There's something harmful within what was said. And I told him, I never said that. And that comes down to the crux of what I want to talk about in this stream. Because when it comes to pathological pedantry and the assumption of meaning, what I said was the message in question was not intentionally, objectively, or deliberately harmful. And his response was, how can you not think it was harmful? And that is not what I said. I was very careful with my words. I have this effect, not effective, that's different, affected speech pattern, which means that without thinking about it, without putting in extra energy, it's not a conscious effort I do. I choose my words oftentimes, especially when stressed or concerned about feelings of my own or the other parties, to be very deliberate. And my meaning is usually on the nose. In saying that it was not intentionally harmful, I pointed out that the intention was to be attention grabbing, to kind of shake the conversation in a way that would tell the other person to take it more seriously. That was the intent. Harm was not factored into the intent. But I also recognize that intent really is only a small portion of the equation when we're talking about active harm. And so I went on and I said that it was not objectively harmful, which was my friend's other claim. And to that, I was only saying that the harm was subjective, that one person could be of the persuasion that harm was not done, and that in being of that persuasion, that would not inherently invalidate the inverse. I'm getting incredibly, I was too pedantic to say pedantic there. I'm getting very, very much an affected speech pattern here, trying to explain this, but that it would not invalidate the other person feeling harm because it is subjective. That you can't say whether it is or isn't in this case. And for that reason, you must then respect the parties that claim to be harmed therein and adjust from there. And the third word that I added in, the only one that wasn't a claim that my friend was making, was deliberately. I said that it was not deliberately harmful. And in my view, it wasn't. Um, I can clearly see how the message was or could be taken as, rather, could be taken as harmful. I can clearly see where someone might misconstrued that that was the intent all along. But it wasn't the intent. It wasn't the motivation, and therefore it wasn't deliberate. That does not mean that there was no harm done. And yet, in this situation, my friend's response was still how fucked up it would be, or that it was from his point of view, that I supposedly did not see harm in the message. I hope that anyone who's watching this at this point can see the difference therein. And the whole conversation kind of devolved from there, as much as it was so um, pleasantly structured before, in that it became a discussion as to as to whose communication issues were at fault. In the scenario where someone says something and a second person then finds meaning where there was not stated or intended meaning in that message, and then gets upset due to finding said meaning that was never there, is the communication issue on the shoulders of the person who said the thing that was then misconstrued, or on the person doing the misconstruing of the statement? Does that make sense? And I was firmly in the camp that if someone were better at communicating, and I use better there very hesitantly, if someone lacked communication issues, if someone did not have roadblocks to effective communication, then that person would be, at least most likely, to be the person in the scenario that was being misconstrued because they said what they meant all along. They chose their words with the knowledge that those words conveyed only a certain meaning, up to a point of meaning and stop. And so the person with the less effective communication method, and therefore the communication method that should be labeled deficient, in my mind, is the person who takes a perfectly understandable message with carefully curated meaning, finds meaning that was never actually there, and from there, social issues emerge due to the ensuing misunderstanding and discongruence between what was said, what was meant, and what was in the end interpreted. That was pretty heavy, pretty thick and complicated of a topic, and I didn't do a very good job, nor was I trying to tone down my affected speech patterns in this video because I feel that showing you the example of the patterns makes part of the point of the video. And I hope that I made sense to at least some of you. I hope some of you can see yourselves in this video. Be like, I do that. That's happened to me. Wow. Because I think that's very important. And if not, if I've just been talking to myself this whole time, well, it's been fun. I'm going to end the stream now because I think I've said my piece on pathological pedantry and the assumption of meaning, at least for today, and I may stream later, but it hopefully won't be about that topic. I will see you. Bye.